Today's reading is selected verses from Psalm 136. It can be found on pages 501 to 502 of the Bibles. Oh, give thanks to the Lord, for he is good, for his steadfast love endures forever. Oh, give thanks to the God of gods, for his steadfast love endures forever. Oh, give thanks to the Lord of lords, for his steadfast love endures forever. Who struck Egypt through their firstborn, for his steadfast love endures forever. And brought Israel out from among them, for his steadfast love endures forever. With a strong hand and an outstretched arm, for his steadfast love endures forever. Who divided the Red Sea in two, for his steadfast love endures forever. And made Israel pass through the midst of it, for his steadfast love endures forever. But overthrew Pharaoh and his army in the Red Sea, for his steadfast love endures forever. Who led his people through the wilderness, for his steadfast love endures forever. It is he who remembered us in our low estate, for his steadfast love endures forever. And rescued us from our foes, for his steadfast love endures forever. Who gives food to all flesh, for his steadfast love endures forever. Oh, give thanks to the God of heaven, for his steadfast love endures forever. This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God. Children, come on forward now. We got some talking to do. You can sit on the steps, have a seat on the floor here, wherever's comfortable for you. Now, how many of you up here were involved with Vacation Bible School? As Pastor Mark's microphone falls off. Sorry, let me just fix this a second. So you can stand up to do that. Let's try that again. So how many of you were here for Vacation Bible School this week? So many of you, if not all of you, are experts about today's sermon. You think so? Yes? How many of you actually remember one thing from what happened this week? How many of you remember two things that happened this week? Three things that happened this week? How many of you were so tired yesterday that you didn't want to get out of bed in the morning? I see lots of hands over there, maybe especially the ones that were volunteers here for Vacation Bible School this week. I had a wonderful week, and I hope that all of you had a wonderful week as well. Now, if some of our adults, oh, you're still tired over there, Isaac? Was it a long week? Now, for some of the adults who maybe weren't here last Sunday or last week, what did this whole building look like last week? Emma?
Like an African savanna.
An African savanna or safari.
Yeah,
We had some streamers up here.
and animals.
And animals, and we had a big sign up front here. How about the hallways? What did the hallways look like? Ava?
Bear, the crack.
The jungle. It looked like the jungle in here.
Yeah, and I saw horn.
And you saw some horns, maybe from some animals, right? There were lots of things that reminded us of maybe a safari or a savanna or a jungle. Yes, Declan?
I saw the horn, so I picked it up and then put it right here.
You pretended to be the animal that had horns on it? So, do you remember what the name of our Vacation Bible School last week was? Bryn? Well, so 3 words. You're already getting ahead of me. But did you hear Mr. Carrick's reading? He got to repeat something a lot of times. I think the grown-ups probably heard it. Maybe even some of us will remember it because he said it so many times. For his love endures forever. Right? And we even sang a song about it too, right? For those of us that remember things better when we sing something, right? But then there were 3 words, especially that Mrs. Lightstein wanted to make sure we remembered by the end of the week. Those 3 words were?
God is good.
all remember something. But why did we have like a jungle or an African savanna? Do you remember what the title of VBS was, Logan? Roar. And did we have a big sign that kind of looked like this? Thanks to Julia Mitchko, if she's up there, we're going to brag on her a little bit more. She painted a big sign that looked just like this. And the title of our VBS was Life is Wild and God is Good. And that's why we had this big lion in the front that was roaring, because life can be all sorts of different things. And through the different classrooms that you went to, or whether you were playing games, or whether you were coming in here to listen to stories, we heard some different things about life. Do you remember any of the main characters from what happened in this room or in any of the classrooms that Mrs. Lightstein talked about or any of the teachers talked about? Elizabeth? Darius? Was Jarius? Was Jarius his name? Did I have it wrong? Okay, so if it was Jarius was the main character in Mrs. Lightstein's stories, right? We heard a lot about his life that maybe you all can relate to, or maybe some of the grown-ups here can relate to, as we heard about his life over the week. How about in the classrooms? Julia, do you remember any of the main characters from the classrooms? Oh. Moses was a big deal in all of our classrooms, and then I heard Declan say Pharaoh over here too. Right? So we had two main stories that we talked about. Who do you want to tell me about, Anna? The disciples were maybe involved one day too. Bryn, who do you remember? The Israelites. Logan, who do you remember? There were animals that helped us to remember each of the classrooms, right? Who do you remember, Isaac? You remember some of the animals again. So, what do you remember, Declan? The Promised Land. So, our two stories for the week were Jarius, who had some stuff going on in his life, right? And then we had Moses, who kind of had some stuff going on in his life too. And so, again, VBS, the very first day, we heard that Darius, is it Darius? We heard that Darius, mom and dad, maybe got a divorce. And it wasn't really fun. Do you remember that from the story? And Darius had to live sometimes with mom and had to live sometimes with dad. And he didn't like it, right? And then he got to go spend some time with his dad, because every year they used to go on a vacation to the Outer Banks. But since mom and dad had been divorced maybe for a little while, dad had this new lady friend, right? And she wanted to go on vacation somewhere else. So where did they go on vacation? Do you remember? They went to Africa. And so we heard about Darius's life being what? It wasn't what he wanted to do. It wasn't the Outer Banks like they always do. Life was so unfair. None of you ever complain about your lives being unfair, do you? Mom and Dad, why do they get to do that and I don't? And I'm sure none of the adults ever say, how come so-and-so got that and I didn't? Life is so unfair. And in Moses' story, do you remember how Moses' story started when they were in Egypt? So they were slaves in Egypt. How many of you got to make bricks in one of the Bible school classrooms? And you got to work hard. And if you weren't working hard enough, they yelled at you. And they didn't give you a water break. and life was unfair. But even in the midst of all of that, what did Mrs. Lightstein say that Darius could do, or that the Israelites could do when life was unfair? Well, they could pray or talk to God, because even sometimes when our life is unfair, Brand, what are those 3 words? What were the 3 words, everybody? Now, just imagine if we've got like 20 or 25 up here right now. Let's imagine like 5 times that many this week. So that was day 1. Day 2, Darius was on his African safari, and they saw a cute little baby cheetah. Right? But if you know anything about baby cheetahs, or for that matter, if you know anything about baby humans, sometimes their mothers are a little protective. So when Darius saw that baby cheetah out in the African savannah, what do you think he wanted to do? He wanted to pet it, maybe? He wanted to go play with the baby cheetah? But that was not a good idea, was it? Because if he did that, what do you think Mama Cheetah was going to do? Something not very good, right? He might get eaten or at least attacked, right? So instead of getting out of their Jeep and going to play with the baby cheetah, what did they have to do?
Be quiet and say
They had to sit in their Jeep really quiet
for 15 hours.
for a long time. And how do you think Darius and his family felt with those cheetahs all around them? So sometimes life can be scary. Now in that Moses story, after Moses went to go talk to the Pharaoh to say, you should be nice to my people. And actually, I heard from God that you should let us go free. And you should let us go to the promised land, right, Declan? That's what you told us about? And Pharaoh's response was, no. Why would I do that? Who's going to do all my work if you get to go, if you get to leave? And so God decided to do, how many fingers am I holding up? 10 plagues to convince Pharaoh to let the Israelites go. And when all of those different plagues were going on, how do you think the people felt? How did they feel? Do you think they were scared? Would you be scared when the sun didn't come up one day? Would it be scary if, like, the ocean turned into blood? Ew, right? Would it be scary if there, or at least annoying, if there were like bugs all over the place and you couldn't even see? Ew. That would be kind of scary and gross, right? You wouldn't be able to go fishing, for all of you who like to fish. But even when Darius was in that Jeep, or even when those plagues were going on, what could the people do? And talk to? Because even when scary things are going on, we remember what 3 words?
God is good.
God is good. Is Pastor Mark going too slow? Do I need to speed up with our story today? Yeah? It's okay. I asked the question, so I expect an honest answer, right? So day 3, after Darius got home, he was so excited. But wait, he didn't get home yet, did he? That wasn't the 3rd day. The 3rd day, after they got done with their safari, after they got to see the cheetah, Dad told Darius, we got to have a talk. right? And what did Darius's dad say? Darius's dad said, you know that lady that's here with us on this trip? I'm going to marry her. And Darius maybe wasn't so excited about that. And now in Moses' story, after those 10 plagues, the people got away and they got free. But then once they got out of Egypt, what happened? At first, they got through the Red Sea, but then they started complaining, didn't they? They said, where's all the good food that we had in Egypt? Where's the yummy drinks that we had in Egypt? We want to go back. At least we had food and drinks there. So the third day we learned that what happens? Life changes. Right? For all of us, things happen in our lives that change that we don't always like. But what's the 3 words? So even with changes, even though you might move, or even though you might have to start a new school and you might have to make new friends, that even though life changes, God might have something planned for you. Now the next day, now Pastor Mark got ahead of himself because he was trying to go fast for you guys. Right? So the 4th day, we heard that Darius got home. And Darius had to maybe go back to school, or maybe he missed his dad, or maybe he wanted to go back to the African savannah. And so Darius was sad. Any of you your lives ever sad? Sometimes, right? And the Bible story in your classroom that you learned that day talked about that thing on the wall. What's the thing hanging on the wall right there? The cross. And we heard the story about how Jesus died for us. And we heard how probably all of his friends and family were really sad. But even in sad days and when sad things are happening, what can we do? What can we do? We can talk to God and we can pray. And we remember, what are those 3 words? That God is good. Right? Because what happened after Jesus died on that cross? 3 days later, he came back to life. And what holiday do we celebrate when Jesus comes back to life? And so the last day in Darius's story, we hear that there's a big party, right? We hear that there's a wedding, right? And Darius gets to have actually a lot of fun. So all those changes that he thought were going to be hard or bad or scary or all those things that were unfair or maybe even sad, that God had something planned, right? That life was good, and what are those 3 words? And we remember on that last day in the classrooms that no longer did the Israelites have to wander around in the desert, but they crossed through some more water. Anybody remember what it was called? The Jordan River. And they entered into the promised land. Has Pastor Mark talked enough? Do you think the grown-ups understand what happened at VBS a little bit this week? If maybe they got little bits and pieces, maybe they know a little bit more what we talked about. So I got pictures for you because you're tired of listening to me. And we're going to play the CD. Brandon, you can put the CD on first because it's a little longer. Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Coy. And once the CD starts, then we can start that slideshow. So let's say a prayer together. My hands I fold, my head I bow, my eyes I close right now. And say, thank you, God.
Thank you, God.
For VBS.
For VBS.
For all our children.
For all our children.
For all our volunteers.
For all our volunteers.
And for this church.
And for this church.
Where we can learn